All right, I'm here with Grant Gish, Vice President of Comedy Development and Programming at Marvel Entertainment. Marvel Television.
You nailed it.
Television and Entertainment. Yeah. Great. So thanks for coming in, Grant. So Grant and I, we've got mutual friends. We've met a few times through the years at parties, and then most recently we were throwing axes together at a bachelor party. And I bugged him to do this, and he graciously agreed. So thank you for coming.
No, it's my pleasure to be here. There's nothing quite like the bond of axe throwing, I think.
Yeah, for anyone that hasn't tried axe, I did it for my birthday.
Joe told me, and I was very jealous. Yeah. I want to go do it. It's right up here, right?
Yeah, right in North Hollywood, and it wasn't quite as cool as the Austin one,
right?
Because you couldn't drink. Like the Austin one, we were able to bring in our own beers. They're still waiting for their liquor license. And then just the guy that hosted us and kept score and everything, he was just such an LA douchebag. The guys in Austin were just cool dudes, just there to have fun and throw X's. And this guy was clearly a model,
right?
Just the tightest jeans I've ever seen on a guy. He had a nail behind his ear,
God.
Just
which is funny because you can find that in Austin as well. They're just not at the axe throwing places,
right?
Yeah.
You're from Austin? Right?
I'm from Dallas.
Dallas, okay.
But most of my family lives in Austin now.
Cool. That's a nice segue. So I always ask everyone the same question: Where are you from, and how did you get up? How did you end up in Los Angeles?
Of course, from Dallas. Born and raised, left there to go to college at Washington and Lee University.
Where's that?
It's in Virginia, tiny town called Lexington, Virginia.
Okay.
Sort of Southwest Virginia, 2 hours from DC. Little liberal arts school, of course, no TV or film program. Mm-hmm. So I sort of gravitated to the closest thing toward that as I started to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, which was to be a journalism major.
Okay.
They had documentary film courses, stuff like that. Plus I wrote for the school paper and edited the back pages, which were the entertainment and comedy sections, which is, once I started doing that, I realized, this is what I like to do. This is what I should look to do for a career. Started sniffing around. My brother hooked me up with an internship in New York the summer after my junior year at Scott Rudin Productions.
Oh,
big film producer. Yeah, it was great. And of course, I had no idea. I was like, oh, great, a job. But it was, 3 days a week, no pay. I think I got $20 a day for lunch, which I was thrilled with. Basically just sleeping in an NYU dorm, the cheapest place you can afford for the summer.
Yeah.
But it was such a great gig because I learned the difference between development and production.
Mm-hmm.
The development guys sat in a back room, read scripts, gave notes. The production guys were up in the front and were the ones who, would get phones thrown at their head or get yelled at by who knows what. And so I quickly learned, I like the development side.
Oh, really?
I love to read. I didn't know what a note was at the time.
Yeah.
I remember sitting down with an exec and trying to give a thought at that age and just was probably such a disaster. But it was the first time I'd ever seen a script. So, I wasn't too hard on myself.
Yeah.
It was also during that internship that I heard about the PAGE program, the NBC PAGE program to be specific. So after college, I had no idea how to get into anything, TV, film, you name it, except for the PAGE program. So I applied to both the LA and New York versions of the PAGE program. I just happened to get into the LA side first. Had never set foot in LA, packed all my gear up in the car, and drove out here as only a 22-year-old would do.
I love that. That is actually my favorite story. Just not you particularly, but that story of that person that's just packs their car, drives to LA, $80 in their checking account. I'm gonna make it work. I love that.
It was great. I can picture my car. I have my folding, TV dinner table trays. I brought 2 of those that I'd had in college. I think they were my dad's or granddad's.
I need a place to eat dinner.
I literally got them out here, and they were my bedside tables. They served as everything over the years. Awesome. They were great, but no, it was quite a journey. Driving through. I remember driving in my old Ford Explorer through the Mojave Desert, and 110 degrees in September, and I stopped at a Dairy Queen. They had at the time something called a flamethrower burger, a super spicy. I was like, oh, that sounds great. Get that. So I get in the car, I'm starting to heat up, I'm sweating, it's getting hot. And right then, no joke, my car starts smoking, overheating because I'm cranking the AC. So I have to pull over on the side of the road, let it cool down while I'm my mouth's on fire from a habanero flamethrower burger. But you're exactly right though. That's the beauty of it was you're young and you don't know better.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I'm I would never do that again.
Yeah.
But it got me out here. I stayed on a buddy's couch, a guy I had gone to 8th grade with, who moved out here after high school to be an actor. who's since gone now, but he was kind enough to loan me his couch where I slept for 2 weeks until I found a roommate through the Page program, and then I eventually moved in with him. But yeah, it was an ordeal getting out here, and then got here. My car immediately got keyed. I think the first night I was here, which I still have the note the guy left on my car. I wish I could remember it, but I kept it. I framed it because it was this awful vitriolic thing.
Oh, like someone keyed your car on purpose and like left you a note to explain why they keyed your car?
Correct. I had Texas plates. I guess he had thought I'd taken up one of his spots or something, and he keyed my car, left me a nice souvenir.
You're like, welcome to LA.
And I was like, well, exactly. I was like, great, this place is great. But it worked out. I spent 8 months as a Page at NBC in the Page program, where I really got my feet wet. I learned the names of agents. I met assistants. I met executives. The first 3 years of that program, you do stuff like give tours of the Tonight Show, work on the Ellen Show, seating people, in the audience. But you also eventually get to go work in different divisions. I happen to be placed in the development and current division, which is where I met tons of execs and assistants, did stuff like answer rollover calls, stock the copier with paper. But it was invaluable because you just make those connections, most of whom I still know to this day and keep in touch with. Got my first actual job out of the Page program as the assistant to the head of comedy development at NBC. And in true fashion, after 8 months, true Hollywood fashion, I should say, she was fired while still on a contract. So she worked out pretty well for her. And then after that, her replacement came in, worked for him for a couple years, which was great. And then once you get to the point where you can kind of do it blindfolded, I started sniffing around and ended up leaving there to get my first job as an executive at a place called Good Humor TV, which is run by Tom Werner of Roseanne, Cosby Show fame, and a guy named Mike Clements. That was great because Mike and Tom really taught me the ropes of producing. We had a deal at Warner Brothers, and more specifically, animation producing. We produced 2 animated shows for them. A show called The Life and Times of Tim for HBO, and a show called Good Vibes that ultimately went to Comedy Central. And the reason I say all that is because it was through Good Vibes that I got my next job. I met the folks at Fox Animation through Good Vibes where we had originally developed it. They happened to be looking for a new director of development at the time that was right around the writer's strike. I had lost my job for 3 months during that while at the production company, and I wanted more stability. I was like, you know what? Let's go to a big studio. Let's try that out. There's at least a contract there. There's stability. I'm young in my career. I'll get to meet more people, make more connections. So I jumped over to 20th Century Fox TV, specifically to the animation department, where I spent the next 4 years working with a really great group of people, developing a lot of shows, but also working on awesome shows like American Dad, Bob's Burgers, and the numerous other animated shows we put on the air during that time.
Yeah.
After 4 or 5 years of just doing animation, I was fortunate enough to actually then start dipping a hand back into the live action world, which was fantastic. That's sort of where I come from. At 20th, yeah, just helping that team out. I knew all those execs really well. We had a good, good relationship. So it was nice. What I thought would be just a couple shows helping them ended up being a lot, almost more than what I was doing on the animation side, still, heading up development there. And after 7 years of that, sort of right around when I was renegotiating to stay at 20th, this job at Marvel TV opened up. It was something I had never even thought about, but a buddy of mine had just left to go over to the drama side at Marvel. And I was joking with him one day and said, hey, if they ever get into the comedy business, let me know. Sure enough, he texted me, 4 or 5 months later and said, they're actually looking for someone. Are you interested? And I liked the idea of, yes, it's Marvel, but it was an opportunity to continue doing both animation and live action. Yeah. I didn't want to leave one of those behind because I enjoy working in both. That was a long-winded way of, telling you how I got to where I am.
Well, I was going to say, I think you might have just set the record for the fastest summary of your career thus far on this podcast. Yeah.
Nice.
You really
we can dive back in. I thought that was slow. I don't want to bore anybody. Good Lord.
No. Well, let me jump backwards a little bit.
Yeah, please.
So I love that you were in the Page program. I think the Page program is really similar to how I got started in the industry, which is like working at an agency, like the mailroom. So like anytime someone's like, I just met with a girl yesterday that's like really wants to be a writer. She's like PAing on a reality show and she doesn't know where to start. And I think the 2 places I always recommend are like, look into the agency mailroom or the page program. What do you think? Do you know what the page program, like, why do you think they chose you, or what do they look for? Are they just like, is it open invitation? Is it seasonal? Is it like, how do they find people?
It's such a good question. And you're right. It is a great entry job into the business. I think aside from, the agency world, it's one of the only ways I know. I guess it's PA, working in an agency, or the page program. And there's obviously there's a myriad of other smaller ways, but those are the sort of big three to me. The page program, my specific in was my mom was a journalist. She had worked with an NBC News journalist whose name escapes me. He'd been on the air for a long time. So in my cover letter, I just sort of dropped a name. Had never met the guy, didn't know who he was. I didn't say I knew him. I just sort of used that name. And I think that's what got me in the door because they brought it up in my interview. And then I was completely honest at that point. It's like, oh, just let you know, he's just a family connection. I don't know him. And they got it. But I think anything you can use to your advantage to get in the door, go for it. The page program is pretty notoriously tough to get into. But that said, there's two programs. There's New York and there's LA. I think a lot of people think, oh, New York, I don't want to have to go work in news after that. And it certainly is a feeder into news in New York. But I think I know more New York pages who work in our industry out here than I do LA pages.
Interesting.
Of the crew that I was pages with in LA, there's probably 3 or 4 who I know who've sort of risen the ranks and been successful out here. And I think I know 10 or 11 New York pages who are out here working consistently.
Do you have an idea of why that would be?
I don't. I honestly don't. I think a lot of it it was sort of, they're all people of my era, same year.
Yeah.
And I think there were just more people who didn't wash out in New York and sort of stayed the course. People who worked at SNL or, any of the or Tonight Show in New York ended up making their way out here to LA. I don't know. I would love to know. I just had this conversation last weekend, but it's a curious thing. But it's a great program. It's definitely a great way to get your foot in the door. And it also helps you figure out what you want to do. Because
you get like assignments. Options. It's like, all right, so you're going to, for a month, you're going to make copies of scripts at the network. Mm-hmm. And then for another month, you're going to seat people at the Ellen show. Or how does it work?
At least when I was there, 15 years ago, it was the first 3 months, you can't do anything except work the Tonight Show. At the time, it was Ellen. And I think for a little bit, Dennis Miller show. This will date me. And also Carson Daly show.
Yeah.
So you'd see people on those shows. You'd sell merchandise in the store. And the big thing is you had to give a tour of the lot. And I think a lot of people didn't do the program because they didn't want to have to be a tour guide.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, having never given a tour, I had so much fun with it. You're in the little Ken at the Page uniform, with the cheap tie and cheap blazer that they give you. They give you all that except for the shirt and the shoes. And the funny part about our tour was you were supposed to stick to a script, but everybody had their own shtick, and a lot of it was made up. It was the most boring tour in the world because you were walking through a lot. The only thing they shot there was The Tonight Show and Days of Our Lives, and maybe Access Hollywood. But you couldn't see anything. Those are all mostly live sets. So you could walk by and be like, and behind these doors is Days of Our Lives. The highlight of the tour was really the carpentry shop where you could see some action, and that's it.
Yeah.
But people loved it. And you'd spend an hour talking about Foley sound effects and, so the magic of TV. So that part was actually really fun, but I know a lot of people hated it. I had a lot of fun with that, and just because you do it with another page and you just develop a shtick back and forth.
Is that that's at the NBC Universal lot?
It was, at the time, it was on the Burbank lot, which is now not owned by NBC. I believe it's called Burbank Studios.
That's right. Yeah.
Just a rundown
right across
old place.
From the Wiener Schnitzel.
That's exactly right. Right. We know that Wiener Schnitzel well. And now I believe it's on the Universal lot.
Right.
That's where they all are. And the New York pages are in 30 Rock.
Very cool.
But yeah, terrific program. Definitely, I always start with the page program, and I think, all right, what do I owe to even, still being in LA? It's definitely the page program.
Yeah. So then you jumped from there. You got your first full time. They pay you in the page program, right?
$10 an hour, I think.
Okay.
But you didn't work a full 40-hour week. I think it was like a 30-hour week.
Oh,
and you asked about assignments too, but just to jump back to that. So you do 3 months doing all the mandatory stuff. Then you'd apply for what were called assignments, and those covered everything from marketing, sales, development, current, you name it. They had about 20 of them.
Yeah.
You'd apply, meaning you'd interview against other pages, and then the assistants in that department would say, okay, we want him to come work for us. Usually they were about 3 months on assignment. I stretched my assignment into 5 months, And then after that, was lucky enough that Cheryl Dolan's the head of comedy said, you know what, I like the cut of your jib. Come work for me. And the rest is all history after that.
So 5 months in the page program, and then you were like a full-blown assistant.
Exactly. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I knew how to answer a phone at that point, thanks to being a page. But as far as the business goes, I was totally green and a little naive, a lot naive, which I think was better because I was sort of fearless because of it. I didn't know what I was stepping into and how big of a role my boss had, how big of a role I technically had, by de facto. So it was better at the time that I didn't know, oh, maybe I shouldn't just be pitching people all the time. It got me in the door and it got me there to stay, which is great.
Yeah. So what did you do? And we can be brief about this because I mean, I feel like it's fairly obvious and you've talked a little bit about it, but as an assistant to a head of a department, like what were your main responsibilities? Like day to day, what are you doing?
It's a good question. There's the admin stuff, answering the phone, taking messages, setting meetings. Back then, it was stuff like messengering and sending physical copies of scripts, DVDs, a lot of scheduling. That was a big part of it back in the day because those people are very busy, the heads of comedy. Reading stuff, compiling lists, a lot of that stuff. What you're missing out on is being in those meetings.
Right.
It's once you get to the level of, a coordinator or really a manager, we finally get to go behind the closed door where you actually start learning the other side of the business.
Yeah.
On the assistant side, you can learn a lot through osmosis, just listening on the phone, which is so important to listen to every call and to learn every name, whether it be an agent or writer, whoever. But it's really not till you get on the other side of the door that you can start putting it to action. And you still have to listen, but then you can actually see what's going on in those meetings.
Right. So remind me again the name of the place that you got your first executive job?
It was Good Humor TV.
Good Humor TV. So they hired you straight from assistant. Like you were an assistant and they gave you like a manager or something?
I was still on a desk, so I was an assistant, but I was also the coordinator.
Gotcha.
There were two of us, I believe, at the time who were sort of split coordinator duties because it's a beast of basically tracking list of every competitive network's development that is going on around town, which is, at the time, but there were probably, hundreds of shows, that were being developed, not hundreds, but over 100 between the big four networks plus cable at that time that we started tracking. So that was a bear of a job. So I was able to sort of, on my resume, say, I am a coordinator. I'm doing that, plus still answering phones and being an assistant. So my gig with Good Humor TV was as a manager of development.
And you had like a massive like Excel spreadsheet or something that was like, so they could be like, oh, is Matt Nix available? Could we have Matt Nix come and pitch on this? And you'd be like, no, Matt Nix is doing this show at this network, or like he's in a deal here, blah, blah, blah. You just had to know like what every writer in town was doing, basically.
It was all of that. It was every list ever, whether it be writer related, who's available, who's on an overall, and also which, what scripts are being developed, where, what stage are they in, when are we getting these competitive cuts. It was, you tracked everything, everything going on around town, but it's also a great way to learn the business.
Yeah.
You learn everybody in town.
Yeah. At what point did you start being able to like develop your own projects, like take pitches and, pitch stuff internally?
Realistically, I could pitch writers or ideas as an assistant. You don't want to overdo that. It depends on your relationship with your boss too. I think I probably did one or two while I was an assistant because you kind of know your place to a degree and you're still learning, most importantly.
Yeah.
Again, if you have that rapport with your boss where you can talk about somebody you like, then you should do it. It shows that you're interested, if nothing else, and you're eager and ambitious. Realistically, when I was a manager, when you really want to start putting your stamp on stuff and saying, hey, wouldn't this idea be cool? Or I met with this writer, because that's also the point where you can start taking writer meetings, general meetings.
You're not chained to your desk anymore,
exactly.
Answering phones and like
Completely.
Doing grids. You can like go out and see people do shows and meet for lunches.
Exactly. You can start making your own phone calls to managers and agents, setting those meetings with people whose scripts you enjoyed. I think that stage is such an overlooked stage in the business, your first exec job, because that's where you meet your first writers. That's where you learn how to take a meeting. That's where you learn how to sit in a pitch. That's where you have to learn to sort of be proactive and place your own phone calls. Don't wait for them to come in. You have to be comfortable making those calls to any of the top agents to the mid-level agents to the lower-level agents. And that is it was a huge learning curve coming off the desk. But you got to do it. Everybody has to sort of jump into the fire at some point.
Yeah. So you were at Good Humor, and then you ended up at 20th. Did you like animation? Were you like an animation guy?
It's such a good question because I did is the short answer. I grew up watching, tons of cartoons.
Yeah.
It started as, after school with Darkwing Duck and DuckTales and Tailspin and you name it, I watched it. And then it segued from that to The Simpsons, which we watched every night. I was the one household of my group of friends who was allowed to watch The Simpsons.
I wasn't allowed. I was at first, I think, and then at some point they like revoked the privilege. They're like, this show's too adult for you, and I wasn't allowed to watch it anymore.
You kept saying, "Don't have a cow, man," to your mom. She did not like it.
Yeah, exactly. But I did draw Bart Simpson like obsessively. Like that was like the one thing that I could like sort of draw, and I just I was kind of obsessed with The Simpsons.
I think everybody tried to draw Bart at one point. I could not do it, but luckily my mom understood. I don't know that she understood the value of it, but she just appreciated programming. Like she would take us to see movies all the time. Simpsons was always on, which led to Beavis and Butthead, which I was obsessed with. And
I watched that at a friend's house.
Yeah,
because I wasn't allowed to watch MTV, but I would watch Beavis and Butthead at a friend's house. Yeah,
I lived on that. I was literally a couch potato. I watched a ton of television, and I liked to. And my mom hated it. I'd come home and get a Barks root beer and pretzels, and I'd watch TV, and a lot of it was animation. But to me, it was just TV. Yeah, I didn't separate the two. So when this job opened up at Fox and it was in animation, I was like, you know what? That makes total sense. I've been watching it my whole life. I love it for, Family Guy, South Park, everything that I was watching, and having just worked on 2 shows at Good Humor, it just made total sense. And I'm glad I did it because I truly do enjoy working animation. There's a great freedom to it. And it's also just funny. There's just great satire and comedy elements to it as well.
So were you like working with Joe at all? Did you guys cross over?
Oh,
were you like covering American Dad while he was writing for it?
100%. So
Joe Chandler, first ever podcast guest on this podcast, also one of my oldest friends.
Joe will know better. I think I was there before they came onto the show because obviously I go way back with Joe as well.
Yeah.
Not as far back as you, but since I've been in LA, we were assistants together. He was at the studio at NBC and I was at the network. And he rose up to be an actual executive there as a manager. And I remember having lunch with him once at an In-N-Out in Hollywood, right on Sunset, I think. And he was like, I think I'm going to do this thing. I think I'm going to go write. And he had given me his script called Russian Sub that I don't know if he talked about on your podcast. Is a hilarious script that he wrote with his partner Nick Wegner. Really funny. And I was like, you got to do it. You got to get out there and do it. And so now that I remember it, I forget what their first job was. I think it was a Ricky Blitt comedy. And then they also went on to a show that I worked on called Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah. The animated Napoleon Dynamite. That was the first time I got to work with Joe, run by Mike Scully and Jared Hess. Actually really funny. We made 6 or 7 episodes. If you liked the movie, you would have liked the cartoon.
Yeah, I watched it because Joe worked on it.
There you go. Yeah.
It was good.
And so I worked with Joe on that. And then having had work with him, he knew of the studio. I think we then brought him over to American Dad, 7 years ago, 8. Well, actually, probably like 8 years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So were you in current at 20th or development? Or were they
both.
The same? You did
on the
both.
Animation side, it was the same. So I was developing a lot of projects while also running current on American Dad, Bob's Burgers. I didn't do as much on The Simpsons or Family Guy or Futurama, but I got to go to those table reads, which were hilarious and fun. Yeah. So that was a bonus.
So tell me in like a nutshell, so you're an executive at a big television studio, 20th Century Fox. Like, what's your job? How do you describe like what you do and like what you're responsible for?
This is the hardest question that's ever been asked.
I know there's a lot that you do.
No, but it's
multi-pronged,
good.
But just like
Trust me.
Sum it up for me. I'm like your cousin in Wisconsin that like doesn't know the TV industry, and I'm like, yo, Grant, so what do you exactly do at 20th Century Fox?
That's why I say it's the hardest question because I often think like, how am I ever going to explain this to like my mom? My mom and family know better than to even really ask, except for about the fun parts. Like they know the shows I work on, but day to day, there's a lot that goes into it. There's you wear a lot of hats. You're doing the basic stuff like you read a lot of scripts. You take a lot of meetings with writers, directors, and depending on which job you're in, if you're at a studio job like that, you're not meeting, say, as many, line producer or editor interviews or meetings, but you are involved with those people because you're producing the show to a degree. But if you're at a studio job, I would say the majority of what we're doing is general meetings with the writers and directors, pitches, and notes calls. Lots and lots of notes calls, and then staff meetings. You're in staff meetings a lot. A lot of your day, particularly in the mornings and nights, you use to return phone calls, usually to people about those meetings you've had or about the notes you're setting. You deal with all the shows you're currently in development on. You're the point person with all of those writers. So any stage of notes, you're the go-to person. If you're covering a show, you're the one who has to, hold the hand, not in a demeaning way to a writer, but like you're their go-to person. Like when they need something, they come to you.
Right.
And that's actually the fun part of the job is the relationships with the writers and getting to be creative with them to work through whether it's a note or an issue or just even a production troubleshooting, something you need to get through together. That part is great. You're in it together. But yeah, a lot of notes, a lot of meetings.
Do you like giving notes?
It's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever said they like it. I don't mind it. I don't dislike it. Depending on the project and how tricky it is. I don't like giving other people's notes. It helps when you believe in the note. To me, it was almost second nature. Having come through the journalism school and working on a newspaper, you're doing the same thing where you're analyzing some writing and you're editing it down. This is just a different medium, a different format. So it's not that it was natural, but I understood it when I had to do it. You also have to put yourself in the shoes of a writer and know that like they're putting their heart and soul out there. Like this is when you're writing, putting something on the page, it's not just, oh, here you go. And maybe for some it is, but I think they all take it personally. At least I did when I was writing. So I like to think that at least I can sort of understand where they're coming from and know not just to dive in there and, beat them up about it. There's got to be, a way to deliver. It's like a bedside manner.
Right.
Almost.
And how do you approach a script when you open it? Like, what are you looking for? What sets off your spidey sense of like what you need to give a note on? Like, how do you analyze this script that you now have to like give constructive criticism on, basically?
If it's just a sample script that I'm getting to say for a writer who wants to be staffed on a show, what I'm looking for is something to grab me, meaning a unique tone, really funny writing, like funny jokes, dialogue. Something in the first 10 pages need to say, okay, this is different. This is unique. I've read thousands, probably not an exaggeration, of scripts that are about 23-year-old kids who are living with 3 other people, either in New York or LA, and they're just trying to figure out their lives. It's because that's what writers of that age, that's all they know, and so that's what they do. So you can't fault them for it. But if you read that again, you're just like, there's nothing special. They haven't found their voice yet. So when you find somebody who has, it's very special, and you're like, and I won't say it happens a lot, but when it does, it. The first time I read the Bojack Horseman script that came across my desk, I was like, we can't make this show at Fox because it's high concept and it's talking horses, but it makes total sense. Like this will work. So when you know it a little bit. If it's something we're developing, I'm reading it with a little bit more attention. I'm paying a little more attention to it because you're trying to look at character, relationship, story, obviously comedy, and making sure it all gels. And you may read it once or 2 or 3 times to see what's going on there. So it's a little bit of a different style. For a sample, I'm not as hard on it. I just wanted to grab me and say, I'm doing something different. You may be super, super funny, but with sort of just an okay story or with just okay characters. Or you might be great with dialogue, but maybe not that funny. If there's something there that I see, then I'll want to sit down with you and take a meeting to see what it is and try to, figure out, all right, this person's got the real thing. Or they will get better because every writer continues to get better as they keep writing.
Sure. And when you're at the studio, I want to segue into your current job at some point. But so when you're at the studio and I talked about this with Zach Olin because he's in a similar, he worked at ABC Studios in comedy.
Of course.
So similar, I'm guessing. But so you're at 20th and you guys want to sell shows. You want to put shows into production. So you're trying to like get ideas from the community, pair writers with ideas, and then you're like pitching networks. Like, are you you pitch exclusively Fox? Did they have right of first refusal? Like, how did that work?
It's a great question. Yes and no. You're definitely out there. You're finding the writers who you think you can sell, and that's who you believe in. A lot of times it's established writers. A lot of times it's people you have an overall deal with. A lot of times it's up and coming writers who have a voice, but maybe if they're too green, you pair them with a showrunner, because showrunning is a lot of work. You think most of the time you say, all right, this is a Fox show, or this is an ABC show, or this is an NBC show. But where I was at 20th, you would want to have a good relationship with your sister network and go in and say, hey, we've got this project. But it wasn't just like a call. They knew what you were working on.
Right.
So if they wanted it, they can call and say, hey, we want to hear this pitch. Because you have that relationship, because you see them all day, every day for the most part.
Right, in the same building.
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't mean you're not going to CBS, NBC, or ABC. You end up, at least in the olden days, you used to be able to sell to all those places. It's every year it's been harder and harder, which is sort of this streamlined integration where every network wants only their own studio stuff.
Right. And
you're seeing it now with the streaming sites as well.
Right. Last thing about this, but before we get into Marvel, I've had a few writers on this podcast, and I feel like writing is like one of like probably the most coveted jobs. The most like most people are like, what do you want to do in LA and Hollywood? Is like, I want to be a writer. So as someone that like works with writers and reads writers and like advocates for writers, like what would your advice be to people that want to be a writer? Like if there's like this girl I met yesterday, a PA on a reality show, she writes at home, she watches a ton of TV. Like what does someone like her do to try to achieve that?
It sounds silly, but the answer is to keep writing. I think the ones who make it are the ones who keep doing it. Like just keep writing a little bit. Like I knew a guy who was an assistant at the time, and he would come in and he had this one script he'd been working on. So I'd only ever read one of his scripts, and it was really good. He was getting there, and then I don't know where it came from, but he got some advice of, just go away over the weekend and forget everything you've been working on and write a script, write something new. He did it. He brought it in on Monday, and it was the best thing I'd ever read of his, And then from then on out, he would just have new material every week, every 2 weeks. It's not always going to be good, but at least you're practicing, you're honing it, and eventually you're going to have something that is the script that someone says, oh my gosh, this is the guy. This is what I want. So you've got to be ready, because you never know when that script is going to fall into somebody's lap. There's a great story of two other writers who worked on American Dad with Joe, and these guys, Robert Maitia and Brett Cauley, they were, I don't even know what they were doing at the time, but I had an assistant, this is back at 20th, who found their zine. They were publishing a zine back when those were actually things.
I haven't heard someone say the word zine.
It's exactly right. This is 100 years ago. And my assistant came in, to her credit, and was like, hey, I found this really funny zine at Coffee Bean. It was inside a paper. Do you want to read it? It's really funny. I was like, sure, thinking, nothing will come of this. No one's ever gotten found through a zine. I read it, and it was funny because it was different. It had something that said, this isn't just somebody trying to be funny. This was somebody who didn't care. They wanted to make themselves laugh. Let's put this out there. On a whim, I said, there's an email here. If you can track these guys down, see if they have a sample, see if they have a spec script. Thinking there's no way these guys actually have a script. She reached out to them. Sure enough, they did. And it was great. And the reason I tell that story is they were ready. They had a script that they had written that was really funny. Somehow their name got in front of me, and the script is great. They went on American Dad for, I don't even know how many years, almost as long as Joe.
Wow.
And now they're actually, side note, writing on one of our Marvel shows.
Wow.
So you just never know. You've got to be ready. And I know writing is tough. It's a struggle, just creatively, but also in the business to get in. But even, the girl you were talking about, she's writing, but she's a PA. She's in the world. If people know she's a writer, someone somewhere is going to ask her, hey, can I see your script? Or send me your script. Check it out. It may not be the first person who reads it, but somebody will read it and something will happen.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Marvel.
Boring. We'll skip that.
So what are you doing at Marvel?
Good question. A lot. I've been there 2.5 years. It's flown by. So specifically television, and even more specifically comedy. When I first started the job, everyone was like, comedy at Marvel, what is that? And fortunately, the Deadpool movie had just come out, the first one, Guardians of the Galaxy. I think those movies were starting to show where you could go with comedy in a superhero world, which helped. I think having the first Deadpool movie come out actually helped me say, you know what, this makes sense. You can do comedy with these characters, because I had read comics when I was a kid, for about 5 or 6 years, including Deadpool. So I understood it. I like the idea of playing with these toys, sort of playing in the sandbox, as we say, with these characters. But what we're doing is we're taking those great characters like the Deadpools or Guardians, but characters that are available to us, and saying, who makes sense for comedy? How can we create an original tone? And fortunately, there's thousands of Marvel characters, some of whom lend themselves perfectly for comedy, and some who we've taken who are maybe a little more serious in the comics and turned on their head to make them comedies, which is also fun. But there's just so much comedy inherent in the world of superheroes and supervillains. Supervillains are funny because they're constantly losing, yet they get right back up. They get beat down and they get back up. And I think that's something that's really fun to play with. And not to mention, it's Marvel, and the movies have really paved the way, and all of our drama series too, of showcasing that these are, yes, superheroes, but they're humans at the core.
Right.
They're normal people. Something extraordinary has happened to, for better or worse, and they have to deal with it. And that translates to comedy. You have to care about the characters. You have to care about the ride that they're on, before you start laughing at the comedy. And that's been fun. And not to mention just playing around with different types of tone, different visual styles for all these shows. It keeps me energized, which is good because we're the first audience seeing this stuff.
Yeah.
We don't want that Marvel malaise that all the critics used to talk about with movies, which I think the movies have put to sleep with movies that are completely, new, a comedic Thor, Captain Marvel, Black Panther. They just kept reinventing the genre a little.
Yeah. What TV shows did Marvel have on the air when you started 2.5 years ago?
A lot of dramas. There were actually quite a bit. The first show that I believe they set up was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC.
I watched that show.
There you go. It's still going strong.
Is it on still?
Absolutely.
Is Coulson still on it?
He's
like
still on the show.
Guy?
Yeah.
Clark Gregg, is that his
Clark
name?
Gregg, exactly.
Yeah.
It's our longest running show. It's still beloved by the company. And I think after that was the really the big turning point. They did a show called Agent Carter as well for ABC, but the big turning point was the Netflix sale of Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and then the fifth show, The Defenders.
Yeah.
The mashup of those shows. That was a huge sale, and from that we got a Punisher series, which was huge. So they started paving the way. People were saying, "Oh, we can do a lot with these Marvel characters in TV." And since then, we have The Runaways on Hulu, Cloak and Dagger on Freeform. It almost seemed like everybody wanted a piece. Everybody
Right.
wanted their version of S.H.I.E.L.D. or their version of Daredevil to put out there.
And when you started, did they have any comedies? Were there comedies that were out, or was that like, all right, Grant, we're counting on you, buddy. Put some comedies on the air with these characters.
A lot of that. I won't say it didn't feel like that kind of pressure, but there were no comedies on the air. There were a couple scripts that they had been developing for a little bit before it got there, which was nice to sort of see what they were liking and not liking. So I had a little bit of an idea, but it was a learning curve. Not just for me, but for the company, I think, in general, to start to figure out, it's a whole different set of writers, a whole different set of directors and agents and managers for that matter. Mm-hmm. But I love that. I like the idea of coming in and helping Marvel get into that world, and in both live action and animation. We spent the first year there, learning the ropes, feeling out Marvel, which is very protective of their IP, as they should be, and just sort of learning how that worked and how to protect that IP and not blabbing off about everything we're working on in meetings with writers, which was new.
Right.
Because typically you have a meeting with a writer and you say, we're working on X, Y, Z. Here we had to say, I can't tell you what we're working on, but it's a really cool supervillain project, or it's a really cool, you just be as vague as you could and give them enough nuggets to get interested.
And do you have when you say like, oh, working with Marvel or whatever, do you have like a liaison, like with like that is working with you and like telling you which characters are available, or like how does it how does it work? Like, how do you find the characters? How do you even know what characters are there? Is there just like a hard drive with like all the comics on it? There's like a big room and like with like crates of comics, and you're like, let's thumb through some comics and see what characters are available.
I used to joke that it was like a scene from A Beautiful Mind. It's just one guy somewhere in a closet with a whiteboard with all the names in it. He was just, he could sift through and say, all right, we have the rights to this one. We can't touch that one. Movie people are doing that one, but
don't they have a guy that I feel like I read about
Yeah.
a guy who's like that's like sort of overseeing like the entire universe in every medium that they publish stories in, and like to make sure that it's like it all
Right.
connects and makes sense and stuff like that.
I wouldn't doubt it on the feature side. We have people on our end, some of the earliest, the people who helped start the studio, including Jeff Loeb, who runs the studio, who sort of know that on the TV side. They know what's going on in all of our shows, and so we don't go out of bounds. But as far as characters we can use, typically we'll float names to a couple of different people in the company who will then float them to our publishing side of New York or to our lawyers, to our legal team, who will say, we have the rights to these characters, or these are still creator owned from back in the day, or the features people might be using this character down the line. There's an easy shorthand in knowing that, we're not typically going to develop something that, fits into the feature world. We want to have our own world. We want to create our own worlds and kind of let them do their own thing.
Right. But is there like just the list of characters? Does that exist? Like, because there are, like you said, there's
Right.
thousands. Like, how would you even know?
Man, there's a couple places, there's a couple sources. There's the Marvel Encyclopedia. This is the old school way, which most people in our office, you have one sitting, it's huge, thick book with images and write-ups on, but it doesn't cover every character. But it's a fun way to look through and learn about characters you don't know. And then other than that, there's tons of Marvel pages. There's tons of Wikipedia pages on characters. As far as a master list, the closest you'll probably get is on Marvel.com.
Okay.
I think they have a character list there, particularly on Marvel Unlimited. If you're a member of that, I think you can access more of these comics. But even it is not fully complete. I think there's just so many characters, some who've slipped through the cracks here and there.
Right. Well, do you remember I asked you in Austin about a particular character?
No, who was it?
Who was my favorite? I think I did, right? My favorite Marvel comic when I was into comics as a teen was this like nobody knows who he is, like under the radar character called Sleepwalker, and like he was this like alien being that existed like inside the subconscious of a human, and he could only come out when that human was asleep. And
you did. Now I remember it. Yes, you definitely pitched this to me.
Which is weird and like, but for some reason like that, I think it's because I found like the first comic, like #1 of that series, like at a comic book store. I was like, oh, I'm gonna get into this, and I just like kept buying it, and I ended up, reading like the entire series of Sleepwalker.
You were the one. You were the guy.
Yeah, no, exactly, yeah. And I always ask people about him, and no one ever knows who he is.
Again, it's an example of that character that seems bizarre, but actually could be very funny. You could do a really funny version.
You
of
should
that
develop
character.
a show about Sleepwalker.
Was this podcast just an elaborate ruse
Yes.
to pitch me Sleepwalker?
Actually, here, let me get my storyboards.
The
out
Bible.
that I have.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So Act 1.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know if he's available, but I will after this go into work and find out.
I would just be
very
just
curious.
out of curiosity. I'm not actually pitching you the show.
No,
I'm
I
just
hear you.
curious. Like
I am too now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of when you meet with writers. A lot of them who are Marvel fans have their favorites like that. And most of the time, it's characters I've never heard of.
Right.
And so it gets me interested and intrigued to say, maybe down the line, we can do something with that character. We tend to be a little more targeted in that, but I like to have a list of favorites just in case it comes up, even as a guest star or like a cameo in a show.
Do you guys have anything to do with The Gifted?
We did.
Fox?
Our drama side, it was a co-production with Fox because at the time, all of the X-Men, so all the mutant characters, were owned exclusively by Fox.
Right.
Now that's changed with Disney swallowing Fox.
Right.
So they're sort of back into our arsenal.
Gotcha.
So at the time when those were made, both Legion and The Gifted, they were co-productions with Fox.
Gotcha. So what was your first like success in your job at Marvel?
It depends on it defines success. For me, it's I take little victories. Of selling a series and sometimes getting the right piece of casting. That sort of thing. I think the biggest one was the sale of shows to Hulu, mostly because a lot of work went into it. Legitimately 2+ years of finding these characters we wanted to work with, finding the showrunner, writers, and in some cases packaging them up. Finding an EP and packaging them with the showrunner. And then all of that prep work, and then going into Hulu last year and selling them, that was a huge win.
And that just recently got announced, right?
It got announced, I think, in February at their upfronts.
Right. Like, because I'd asked you to come on the podcast before, and you're like, we probably should wait until
That's right. Let's wait until they
big
announce
announcement
it.
that I can't tell you anything about happens.
Otherwise, I would have. This would have been, an even more boring podcast where I talk about, well, we've got a lot. I can't tell you what it is, but they're really cool.
Yeah. So, okay. So tell me what shows you guys sold to Hulu.
So 5 shows to Hulu, all adult animation. So tonally, think. When you say adult animation, it almost sounds pervy, but it's Archer in tone.
Yeah.
So for adults, or South Park, think like that. So 5 shows, the first of which is called M.O.D.O.K. M.O.D.O.K is a giant floating head. M.O.D.O.K stands for mental organism designed only for killing. And in the comics, he's mostly played as a serious supervillain. Mm-hmm. He has a floating head with little dangling arms and legs with a laser beam he can shoot out of his head, mind blast. But we've taken that and with the voice of Patton Oswalt, truly made it a comedy.
Nice.
And it's a 2-hander where it's a little bit of a family comedy, but also an office workplace comedy. After his evil organization is, something happens and he's stuck, kind of in the middle management.
Nice.
I don't know how much of this I'm allowed to say, which is why I stumble over
Too
that.
late.
Too late.
It's out there.
Everybody knows.
All right. So M.O.D.O.K.
M.O.D.O.K. The next one will be a show called Hit Monkey.
Okay.
It's similar to what it sounds like. It's an assassin monkey. He's a hitman monkey. This was a very short-lived comic. He appeared in a lot of Deadpools, actually, as a sort of friend foe to Deadpool. But this is a really epic sort of revenge saga that we're excited to tell. That will be probably our most action-oriented of the 4, which is exciting, from these feature directors, Josh Gordon and Will Speck. It's exciting that they're doing it because they're bringing this very cinematic look to it.
And this is live action.
It's animated.
Very
much animated.
Are these all animated?
All animation.
Okay.
And these guys are they haven't worked in animation, but they have such an eye for it because they're so used to working with storyboards that it's just sort of a no-brainer for them.
Yeah.
Like every scene they've drawn up and it's just beautiful.
What are their names?
Josh Gordon and Will Speck. They did Office Christmas Party.
Okay.
And a few others, and notoriously created the Geico Gecko.
Oh, yeah. Wow. They must be fucking loaded.
They did not own the gecko, as they tell us. They'll tell you very early on. Yeah, that is Geico's.
All right, what's rattle through them? What are the others?
So the next, Tigra Dazzler, female superhero show, odd couple, really funny. Just sort of, you have a Tiger who used to be a scientist, and you have a pop star in Dazzler. Complete opposites, but they have to bond together for a common cause. Last show up will be Howard the Duck, which is, we're not doing the movie that came out in the 80s. We're taking sort of the original material from the original comic run from Steve Gerber and using that as an inspiration. It will be completely original for TV, though. But what we like about Howard is he's this ultimate fish out of water. All he wants to do is get back to his own dimension, his home planet, where everybody looks like him. Mm-hmm. Everybody looks like a duck, a human duck. But in the meantime, he's stuck on Earth. And what's great is he provides this great commentary. Like any foreigner, he's going to have comments on how we do things here in our country, what we get right, what we get wrong. So this is a great opportunity for satire for us to play with that. The 5th show will be all those characters I just talked about mashed up into one called The Offenders. And they'll be
defenders.
Exactly, yeah. They'll have to band together for some common cause, which we don't know yet. That's way down the road.
Yeah. So, and how are these shows rolling out on Hulu? Like, when do they premiere? And
we don't know yet specifically, but with animation, everything takes a while. So at some point next year,
Gotcha.
will be the first one, and then I imagine they'll have their plan together of how they want to roll them out.
So, and what was that like for you to like put that together and sell it to Hulu? Did you do it as a big package thing, or was it like a one at a time?
It was definitely a package sale. It helps that we had a great relationship with them because of our show, The Runaways, on the drama side. And this package was, Jeff Loeb's brainchild of let's do what we did at Netflix, but with adult animation. We've got these great characters. We've spent the last couple of years package them. Why take them out piecemeal, one by one? If somebody wants all of them, let's do that. It'll be a big event, and then we can have our 5th show, The Offenders. So it was very much his idea. I think we knew that, pretty early on in the process, that our goal was to take these out, sell them to one place.
Gotcha. So Jeff
has
Jeff
the
Loeb. Idea.
Correct.
And then it's like on you to kind of figure out what that means and find the writers and kind of put this package together?
Yeah, it's very much, he has the idea, and I coming in, I had a general sense that they wanted to do something like that. It wasn't fully baked, but just sort of naturally over the course of a couple of years, these shows came together. And in some cases, I knew the title, and I would go out and find a writer, find an exec producer. In some cases, which is very rare, the title would just sort of naturally come to us, whether it be through a writer we know or a piece of talent we know who had a relationship with us. But in those cases, it was something that was very rare. Typically, we have the character, we go out and find a writer.
Right.
So once we had, finally had all 4 of those shows packaged up, we said, okay, we're ready. Let's take it out and sell it.
And are you pitching the character to multiple writers and getting people's takes on it, kind of that?
They've done that before on the hour-long side, what they call a bake-off, where you have a few people think up different ideas, and whichever one is their favorite, they go with.
Yeah.
We haven't done that yet on the comedy side. We've been lucky in that each writer we've targeted for these projects, they've fallen in love with the character and come in with a really solid take. So we haven't had to go to other writers. I imagine at some point that will happen. Maybe if it's a character we're less clear on which direction we want to go, or if it's a writer, who's less familiar with it, we may say, let's wait for their take, but in the meantime, let's find somebody else as well.
So what stage of production are you in on all these shows now? Are they like writers' rooms up and running? Like, where are you?
Very early stages. 2 of them have writers' rooms up and running. The other 2 probably won't start till this summer. So very early, we're in the process of trying to attach animation studios so we can get further into the production, recording, animatics, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. I had my neighbor, actually, the guy that lives across the street from me, this guy, Zach, he's like a longtime animator, and he's worked on like a ton of shows. We worked on American or Family Guy.
Oh, he did?
He worked on I think every season of Phineas and Ferb.
Wow.
And he talked through Zach Moncrief is his name, but he was on the podcast and he talked through like every stage of the animation process from an animator's perspective. It's really interesting. So
he knows.
If anyone's listening, you want to hear about how animated shows are, go listen to Zach Moncrief.
Yeah, he will be a lot more intelligible with that side of it than I. But I reckon I know his name from the Family Guy credits for sure.
Oh, really?
I don't think I ever met him though while I was there.
Yeah, he's like the nice guy, and he just like I met him because he like when we moved in, like they like came over to say hi, and then like just kind of one thing led to another. Like,
they brought you a pie.
Yeah, like pretty much. Yeah. Like, what do you do? Like, oh, I'm an animator. I'm like, oh, come over, talk about it. So, cool. So what do you want to do like long term? Like what's your goal? Like obviously right now your goal is to just make Marvel television entertainment the best possible place it can possibly be.
Exactly.
But like what are your long-term ambitions?
I'm going to toe the company line right now. No, I'm definitely very happy at Marvel. I want to make sure, I want to shepherd these shows, get them out there, and also find the next live action property to develop. And if a couple other animated shows, great. Our stuff just sort of lends itself to animated comedy. Put a Marvel comedy brand out there and see if it works. That would be rewarding. Just to get them out there would be nice. Beyond that, what I found I really enjoyed doing at Marvel is the producing side, which you do a little bit at a major studio, but not near as much.
Yeah.
This is very from the ground up, nuts and bolts, where you're involved in, almost every business affairs decision, every production decision. You get a taste of that at a studio, not very much at a network, but at an actual production company. And Marvel Studios, to be clear, on the TV side, is very much a massive studio. We have a full production wing and business affairs wing, but we function as producers on all of our shows. We dive in and we're involved, at every stage that the writer is wearing a lot of hats: development, production, working with our legal team on the deal process. There's so many different ins and outs of stuff that I had to learn jumping into this job that I ended up enjoying, interviewing all your department heads, which was something that I hadn't done at a major studio. And that's, hair, makeup, editing, line producer. I like being involved in that because you really get to see how something gets made.
So you're going against like 21-year-old Grant, who like went into Scott Rudin Productions, is like, I don't want to be where those guys are like busy getting phones thrown at their heads. Right. I want to be in the back room reading scripts. Now you're like transitioning.
It's sort of a natural transition of, with this job, at least on the, what I do now is I don't have to leave behind the development side.
Yeah.
You still get to do that. And I think what I enjoy most about this job is working with writers. And this is just a way to do that more, honestly. You feel like you're in the trenches with them, getting through it all together. And I would never want to leave behind the development side of it. Working with writers on scripts, being creative as far as, finding different story areas or guiding people through that process, finding the right writers. I don't want to leave that behind. But I do enjoy the other side of it, just to see how everything comes together. There's part of me that, yes, it's nice to be a buyer because you have that power, but I really do like, seeing something get made from the ground up.
Yeah. We did cover this, but maybe you can think of anything else you can say. But like, what advice do you give to anyone, not just writers, but just anyone that wants to like break into Hollywood entertainment, wants to work in this business beyond like the Page program, like any other like words of wisdom you can offer?
Completely. It's something that has been asked of me a couple times when I go to this. UT has an LA class out here, an LA sort of semester they teach out at University of Texas. And I get asked the same question there over and over. And what I always say is, to me, the biggest thing is control what you can control. Meaning, don't be a dick. You can control that.
I just want to tell you, that right there might be like the best piece of advice that anyone can hear and everyone should take. Don't be a dick. Because like a lot of people are fucking dicks, and it's like that'll just burn you and like ruin your career.
It's exactly right. And certainly not at that stage. You shouldn't do it ever, but certainly not when you're trying to get a foot in the door. And you can control that. You can also, on that same idea of controlling what you can control, is work hard, put in the effort. People are watching, when you're refilling the refrigerator with sodas or putting paper in the copier, like, don't think that's just a scrub job. People are watching you. People notice when that stuff doesn't happen. So when it does, they're also noticing. So definitely do that. Something else is to not assume. I think it's easy in any stage of your career out here to assume that someone's thinking the worst about you or someone's doing this. That goes back to, you can't control that. You cannot control what other people think. You can only control what you do. So focus on that, and I think you'll be okay. The only other bit of advice too, I would say, is to read. I've always read voraciously, like anything, magazines, newspapers, now everything online, listen to podcasts, which is basically just another form of taking in content, read books. You hear a lot in this business, people who say, I haven't read a book in 3 years, because I've been reading scripts. To me, that's a cop-out. I think you can read something, like I think that keeps you fresh as far as storytelling and good writing. And it also always gives you something to talk about. Yeah. You don't know what interview you're going to be in where you need to pull some ammo out. So that to me is just in general, but life, but for certainly, for sure in our business, you just got to read. You got to absorb everything.
Totally.
Whatever you can get your hands on.
I like that. Control what you can control.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It covers a lot of ground. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So last thing, and I feel like you'll have some intelligent thoughts about this. Like, where do you think this industry is going as a whole? And like, obviously, like a ton of things are changing with like all the different streaming platforms and like companies being gobbled up by bigger companies and stuff. But like, where do you see as like a content, like a provider or a creator, like where are we going? Like how are people going to be watching TV in 5, 10, 15 years?
It's the perfect question for now, because it's changing like as we speak with the advent of stuff like Quibi, these little quick bite programmings.
I don't even know what that is.
We don't know. It's Jeff Katzenberg's new company. Huge backing. I think they raised $1 billion. Don't quote me on that. But literally every major studio, save for I think CBS, has invested in Quibi. It stands for Quick Bites, I believe. And it's, I can't do their pitch for them, but it's something like up to 10-minute programming max. And it will be, they want to find the next Game of Thrones. Their idea is, if you're waiting in a dentist office or waiting somewhere and you only want to watch 5 or 6 minutes, you only have that much time, why should you have to hit pause and finish it later? Like, you should get a full viewing experience in that time and then ultimately get hooked. And they're working with huge talent around town, big name writers, big name actors, big name directors. And so that could change things. We don't know. We don't know if that will work. It's meant to be viewed on your phone or on your tablet which is what people do anyway now.
Yeah.
You know, I never thought I would, but I'm guilty of it. You know, I've done both. And now you can get everything on your TV, basically. Your TV is just a big tablet. That's changing things. It's everybody sees it, that it's everything's pushing towards streaming. Even the big broadcast networks and cable companies are moving their own stuff to streaming, and that, you know, FX as a streaming site. NBC, ABC, CBS have all either tried or have their own streaming sites. You know, CBS All Access being a great example. Mm-hmm. To me, you've seen Fox fall a little bit in that they've sold out their studio. They're focusing on news and you know, reality stuff with a little bit of programming. I feel like eventually, as Disney Plus takes off and Time Warner streaming site takes off, you're going to start seeing that happen more. I don't know. That would just be a guess. I think it won't be sustainable, and it won't make business sense for some of these networks to be supplying shows, you know, to CBS Network and also to CBS streaming. You know, there will always be room for both, and this could be 5 years down the line. But I think eventually it'll be you'll have some programming on your regular cable and some on streaming.
Are we getting into the world where it's just like a competition of, like, it's a competition for subscription fees, basically? So it's like, we're already kind of there. Like, I subscribe to Hulu so I can watch Handmaid's Tale, but I have to subscribe to Netflix so I can watch Jessica Jones or whatever. Like, but like, it feels like that's where it's going, but there's going to be so many streaming options. Like, are we all, it's like, is every household just going to like have to have like 9 streaming subscriptions to like watch all the shows they want to watch? Like, it used to be that cutting the cord for cable means you could like save money, and it almost feels like that's just going to get more and more expensive.
I think they already do have 9.
I guess,
you know,
yeah.
Like, I keep hearing what they're going to end up. It's going to be the same thing that happened with cable, where it's all bundles. You know, with cable, you had your Comcast, but you got your 20 channels. Now it's going to be, you, instead of paying for Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, whatever, Time Warner, you might pay a large fee and get 3 of those included in one. And they're starting to figure that out. You know, I think Apple said that it would, you'd be able to access some of their Apple content on other devices, which will be interesting. Or they'll allow, you know, if you have your Apple TV, you can watch Amazon stuff. So we're already there a little bit, but I think it's unsustainable to have 15 streaming
like
sites.
Disney and Time Warner and, you know, like all of them. There's like so many. There's so many Apple. There's so many that are still like yet to come.
I think it's a little ways off because people are still, you know, I pay for Netflix, Hulu, my regular cable.
You still have cable?
Amazon Prime. Oh yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah,
I can't. I love my remote control and I love the ease. Although I yell at it all the time for freezing, but it's a matter of time before that's gone too.
I thought I'd miss it. I really have not missed it at all because I have YouTube TV,
right?
Which is, it's basically cable.
They have all those. Like DirecTV has a version too. I pay for the whole DirecTV, but they have a version where it's streaming, and you can get basically any channel you want. So I need to go through and just pick the 20 channels I actually watch and say, all right, give me those, and be done with it.
Yeah,
it's just, you know, I don't want to give up yet. It's the same reason I still get a newspaper on Sundays.
Do you really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
and
my
I
God.
love it. It's like a ritual.
You are an old man.
I know. I've been an old man since I was like 16. I love it. It's my ritual.
Awesome. Well, Grant, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time. You're a very intelligent, articulate guy, and you do good work.
Well, thank you for lying and saying all that, but also thank you for having me. It's interesting, you know, taking part in my first podcast. So thank you.
Is this your podcast, Cherry Popping?
Podcast debut. You can use that
Nice.
to sell it when you're getting all the ad bucks rolling in.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they're coming.
No, I thank you for even thinking of me to come on here.
Awesome, cool. Thank you.
I appreciate it.